That's all I have on greetings and general conversation. So, next on the list is the various involuntary noises humans make, aside from speech. On rare occasions, they've confused translators and come through as garbled words, so I want to ensure you recognize them. Cultural Advisor Zinthak swiped to the next slide on the UV screen on the wall, which displayed a photo of a human looking irritated. The educational lecture, though it had become more of a discussion, was going quite well, they thought. The Siliconian advisor had been studying humans since they'd heard the first hints that there was something different about the species, especially the first rumours of commonly being hired as one. As the only sophont species composed entirely of minerals, or as most dismissively referred to them, the rock aliens, it had been a steep climb for them into intergalactic society. Now, Ambassador Korlu and 3 other Siliconian delegates were going to be meeting with 4 human delegates in a cultural exchange event. And any topic could be brought up, just like all the cultural exchanges Ambassador Korlu had been to in the past. Though it was obvious that the event was for educational purposes, no one wanted to make a faux pas, and it was better to be overeducated than to accidentally miss something basic. And Zinthak had been flattered and excited to find out they'd been assigned to educate the ambassador. Noises, Korlu echoed thoughtfully, the electric spark of communication rolling over him as he looked to the picture. This one's making a noise? Yes, but it's more about the motion than the sound. It's a regular noise and a jolt called hiccups. This one they just find irritating, but it's almost impossible to stop, and they have to wait for it to pass. It's caused by some kind of spasm in their lungs. Sometimes it will only happen a few times, but on occasion it can go on for a while. If a delegate there gets the hiccups, they will be very annoyed with themselves, even though it's involuntary. Because they'll be unable to speak properly? Precisely. They paused as they moved on to the next slide. You can see this human is covering their lower face. A cough is a sharp exhale through their mouth, Zinthak explained. That one is straightforward. They sometimes call it clearing their throat, because usually they're clearing it of a stray bit of food, or even the liquid their mouth uses to soften the bite of food. Sounds bothersome. Indeed. Often they'll say, "Excuse me." Coughing can signify danger sometimes, since it can block the airway, but unless the other humans seem concerned, assume it's benign. A burp will appear about the same to you, just more muted. That's an expulsion of air that accidentally made it into their digestive system, sometimes caused by beverages. It's considered rude, even though it's on the involuntary side of bodily functions, so often others will laugh in commiseration if they're at an event like this. Ah, right. They watched as Zinthak went to the next slide. Oh, yes, this one I know. A sneeze. Yes, breathing through their nose filters out particulates, and sometimes an expulsion of air is necessary if there's build-up. It can be sudden and quite loud, Zinthak emphasized. Even other humans can get startled. It might come through as a word, depending on the human's cultural upbringing, but it's bacterial, so common etiquette is to muffle the sound, and any discharge by tucking their nose into the corner of a limb. Discharge? The Siliconian asked, mild disgust in their tone. Yes, the advisor said. These are biological beings, sir. This is why we're going over these things, because we don't want you to get surprised by something gross. If they're genuinely ill, it gets so much worse. But they're just as disgusted as we are by the discharges their bodies produce. Not just because the body is getting rid of it for good reason, but because it's often embarrassing. If they're quick enough, they'll grab a napkin or tissue. Again, they'll usually say, "Excuse me." Korlu made a contemplative sound. That sounds reasonable. Alright, next is a fart. This one tends to be the most embarrassing, Zinthak said. It's just a bubbling noise, but it's due to a buildup of gas in their digestive system, so it can be accompanied by an unpleasant smell. Of course, we can't smell it, but it's cultural instinct for them to be self-conscious. Some humans will even go to the bathroom if they feel they need to fart loudly. Wait, they know it's going to happen? How? Some sensation. I don't have a description. Weird. Zinthak chuckled. It's all weird, Ambassador, as we are to them. True. And lastly, they moved on to the next photo. This is a yawn. A long inhale of air accompanied by a soft noise. This one is somewhat voluntary, and humans often will keep themselves from doing it because it is associated with sleep, and therefore boredom. Ah, and they don't want to make those with them feel as if they're boring. Correct, Zinthak said. They moved on to the next slide, which was a diagram. Now, you've been educated on genders and sexualities of several species, and humans have the same variety amongst themselves. You're familiar with the Voyager spacecraft? Quorlu sparked happily. Of course. Such few species did things like that, just sending out a message into the void. It's no wonder they were friendly towards us. A species that curious and desperate for friendship outside their planet must make friends with everyone. Well said, Zinthak remarked. Here we have a photo from that spacecraft. An image of what they considered at the time to be the two standard genders, male and female. The female is the one that gestates the fetus in her body for 9 months. That's what that is inside her. Can you imagine doing such a thing? So incredibly strange, but wondrous at the same time, the ambassador said quietly. The idea is very unsettling, but still, I never get tired of learning extraordinary things like that. I must confess the same fascination. Humans don't constrain themselves, though, and while their bodies have genders, they can be very flexible in gender roles and identity. Quorlu turned to his colleague. You mentioned something about standard genders. Yes, human biologists would explain that they have 6, Zinthak explained. Technically there are more, but they involve such a degree of variations in the fetus that it's almost possible for it to survive. But I don't want to complicate things. Just so you have some background, in simple terms, the fetus starts off as one gender, female, then about half the time its development will alter, and it will become the second, male. Parents tend to expect one or the other, since that is the case 99 out of 100 times. You can usually identify female humans by their breasts, here, which are used to feed their offspring. Like Norgillian and Nilitonian can produce sustenance for their children. Exactly, but there can be changes that result in slight differences in gender, some statistically rare, some extremely rare, and that's where the other genders come in. They're 1 out of 100 and typically referred to as intersex, females that lack the proper hormones to develop breasts, or who are born without the organs to gestate a fetus, or humans who are born with both sexual organs, though many go their whole lives without knowing because there's no sign of any difference. Of course, the parts of any biological alien's body that are involved in reproduction are personal information. I'm only giving you this background as a foundation for gender. Yes, I assume that like other cultural exchanges I've been to, we won't be discussing genitals, the ambassador said, deadpan. Right, Zinthak said, laughing. It's just a matter of respect to the gender they identify with, since it can be a significant part of their identity, including how they decorate their bodies. There is so much about human hormones, they're so complex. You won't believe it. But the translator only necessitates 3 options, which are he, she, or they. As we all learned with our first contact, they is used for us, and others who don't fall under male or female criteria, but also when, basically, the human doesn't feel they're exclusively one or the other, where those labels are too constraining. Ah, right, Quorlu said. Or they introduce themselves with their pronouns. Sometimes. All you need to do is remember, humans tend to be as lazy as any other species, the ambassador said, with a note of humor in their voice. Many of them don't have the background education of an ambassador going to a cultural integration event. So on Earth, if they're unsure of which pronoun to use, they just ask. And if you use the wrong one and they correct you, you can thank them. Like any other correction at an event like this. Well, that's good to know. Actually, even though they have inanimate rocks on Earth, like most planets, I was told they feel it is only for inanimate objects, Quorlu remarked. I heard of a fight that broke out on Ritan because someone called a human siliconian friend it, Did you hear about that? Yes. Humans are very protective of their friends, which is another reason I'm so keen to have them as allies. Also, I read that sometimes as they mature, they realize their instincts are telling them that they were born the wrong gender, and they will alter their appearance to what they feel they should be. Being transgender can involve changes to their hair, clothes, jewelry, makeup, etc. Some even surgically alter their body to the gender they realize they should have been. The vast majority of the species takes this in stride now, but it wasn't always the case. You needed allies if you struggled with gender. Crowley made a spark of tiredness. I've admitted being jealous of things like the variety of foods they can eat, but there are times I'm very glad not to have to deal with the complications of a biological form. Agreed. The sexual attraction they have to each other and navigating romantic relationships beyond gender and identity presentation, it sounds exhausting. It's no wonder they have so many vid series and movies about the complications they encounter. Every culture on the planet has different procedures and customs for every step of the process. A bit ridiculous, if you ask me. The ambassador motioned to the picture of the female that was still on the screen. Can you imagine carrying around a growing offspring inside you? It's practically parasitic. I won't say that to the humans, they continued hurriedly, causing Zinthek to chuckle. But between you and me... If xenobiology was my field of study, I'm sure I would have nightmares constantly, the advisor confessed. Nilitonians were the most difficult for me to comprehend. Their entire bodies, including appendages, completely squishy. They sparked in discomfort, reminding me of horror stories we tell each other as children, where we start to melt. Oh, don't start, Quolu said uncomfortably. I don't want that in my head. I'll focus on the human skeletons. Proper, hard, sturdy skeletons. We can even see part of it in their mouths, so if all else fails, I'll glance at their teeth to settle my nerves.